The hangar at Naval Air Station Oceana fell silent in the way only military spaces can. Not peaceful, but waiting. Commander Raven Cowery stood beside the fuselage of an FA-18E Super Hornet, her flight suit sleeves rolled to her elbows, grease smeared across one forearm. She was inspecting a hydraulic line when the SEAL team walked in. They moved with that particular swagger that comes from being perpetually one mission away from legend, their boots echoing against concrete. The team leader, a broad-shouldered operator with a beard that violated every Navy regulation except the ones written for special warfare, spotted her and grinned. His eyes flicked to her collar, searching for rank insignia that wasn't there on the working flight suit. He nudged his teammate and approached with the casual arrogance of someone used to being the most dangerous person in any room. "Hey, darling, you know where we can find the pilot?" His voice carried across the hangar, loud enough that the maintenance crew looked up from their work. Raven straightened slowly, wiping her hands on a rag that had seen better days. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she traced her fingers along a panel seam, checking the fit with the practiced touch of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. The SEAL stepped closer, his smile widening. "Come on, sweetheart. We're supposed to get briefed on some close air support mission. They told us to find Commander Cowery." He pronounced it wrong, turning the name into something almost musical but entirely incorrect. His teammate laughed, low and knowing. Raven turned then, and something in her movement made the laughter die. She was small, maybe 5'4" in boots, with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and eyes the color of storm clouds over the Atlantic. Her face carried the kind of calm that comes only from having made decisions while traveling 700 miles per hour with someone trying to kill you. "You're looking at her," she said quietly. The SEAL's expression froze mid-smirk. Behind him, a master chief who'd been watching from the tool crib set down his coffee with deliberate care. The hangar seemed to contract, drawing tighter around the moment. The operator's eyes darted to her collar again, then to the Super Hornet behind her, then back to her face. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Commander," he managed, the word coming out strangled. His hand twitched toward a salute before remembering they were indoors and in working dress. Raven held his gaze for 3 heartbeats, 4, 5, long enough that the silence became its own form of speech. Then she nodded toward the ready room door. "Briefing's in 10. Don't be late." She turned back to her aircraft, dismissing them without another word. The temperature in the ready room could have frozen hydraulic fluid. Raven stood at the front beside a tactical display showing terrain that looked like God had taken a cheese grater to the earth, all ridgelines and wadis, the kind of place where helicopters went to die. The SEAL team sat in the front row, their earlier swagger replaced by something more careful. The team leader, his name tape read MORRISON, kept his eyes forward with the discipline of someone trying very hard not to make things worse. Raven tapped the display, highlighting a compound 30 kilometers inside hostile territory. "You're hitting this facility at 0300. Intelligence suggests high-value target, possibly Tier 1. The compound sits in a valley with limited egress routes." Her voice carried the flat professionalism of 100 briefings before this one. "I'll be your on-station CAS from H-hour through exfil. Call sign Revenant 21. Morrison's head jerked up at that. Revenant. Every operator in special warfare knew that call sign. It belonged to the pilot who'd saved a SEAL team in Helmand Province 5 years ago, the one who'd made a gun run so low her jet's exhaust had ignited grass fires, the one who'd stayed on station with fuel that should have sent her to a tanker 20 minutes earlier. Morrison's eyes went wide, really seeing her for the first time. "You're that Revenant," he breathed. Raven's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, memory, perhaps, or old pain carefully stored away. "The approach is complicated. AAA installations on these ridgelines, possible MANPADS in the village to the east. Your window is tight. Weather's degrading, ceiling dropping to 8,000 feet by game time." She moved through the brief with surgical precision, her hand sketching patterns in the air that translated 3-dimensional aerial warfare into something the ground operators could grasp. She spoke about weapons loads and response times, about IR strobes and abort codes, about the difference between danger close and how the hell did we survive that close. When she finished, Morrison raised his hand slowly, like a student who just realized the teacher was actually an astronaut. "Ma'am, in Hellman, they said you made 4 passes under fire with a damaged engine." Raven was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant. 3 passes. The 4th one was on fumes and prayers. She looked at Morrison directly, and this time there was something raw in her expression. "I heard the fear in your brother's voices on the radio. That doesn't happen twice if I can help it." The maintenance chief found Raven in the paraloft 2 hours before launch, checking her survival vest with the obsessive thoroughness that separated the living from the remembered. Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Whitfield had been maintaining naval aircraft since before Raven learned to drive. He'd seen countless pilots come through, but he'd only known 3 who checked their own aircraft the way she did, physically running hands over panels, checking things that maintenance had already triple-checked. "Commander," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, a signal flare halfway into her vest pocket. "Chief." Morrison came by the maintenance shack, asked me about Hellman. Marcus settled onto a bench, his knees creaking with the memory of 3 decades on carrier decks. "Told him I wasn't there, he should ask you." Raven resumed packing her vest, each item placed with ritual precision. "Nothing to tell, team was in trouble. I had ordnance and fuel, basic math." Marcus snorted. "Math that left you landing on fumes at Bagram with 7 holes in your aircraft and an engine that quit during taxi." She didn't respond, and in that silence Marcus saw what he'd always seen in her, something broken that had been welded back together stronger than before but still bearing the cracks. "They didn't believe you at first, you know, when you called for support that day. Young female pilot, calm as Sunday morning, saying she was prosecuting targets in a hot LZ. They thought it was a mistake, some forward air controller with the wrong frequency." Raven's hand stilled. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible over the hangar's ventilation system. "I know. I heard them checking with each other on the command net, asking if anyone knew who Revenant 21 was, if someone had a female pilot on station." She looked at Marcus then, and her eyes carried storms. "By the end of that mission, they knew." Marcus nodded slowly, pulling himself to his feet. "Those SEALs you're supporting tonight, Morrison specifically requested you. Went through his chain of command, through JSOC, through NAVAIR. Waited 3 weeks for your availability. You earned that, Raven." The Super Hornet sat on the ramp like a coiled predator, gray-blue paint drinking in the pre-dawn darkness. Raven completed her walk-around in silence, her flashlight beam tracing familiar contours, the twin tails reaching skyward, the air intakes gaping like open mouths, the weapons pylons heavy with 500-pound JDAMs, and a full load of 20mm ammunition. The crew chief, a petty officer second class named Diaz, watched her with the particular attention Junior enlisted reserve for officers who actually know their aircraft. "She's perfect, petty officer," Raven said, signing the maintenance log. "She's always perfect for you, ma'am," Diaz replied, his voice carrying genuine pride. "Nobody treats the birds like you do." Raven climbed the ladder, settling into the cockpit with practiced efficiency. The seat molded around her like a second skin, each switch and dial exactly where her muscle memory expected them. She ran through her checklist, ejection seat pins removed, harness connected, oxygen flowing. The instruments glowed softly in the darkness, a constellation of information waiting to guide her through the night. "Revenant 21 ground," the tower controller's voice crackled in her helmet. "Winds 270 at 8, altimeter 3012, cleared to start." Her hands moved through the startup sequence, and the Super Hornet came alive beneath her. The engine spooled up with a rising whine that became a controlled roar, vibrating through the airframe and into her bones. This was the moment she lived for, the transition from earthbound human to something else, something that existed in 3 dimensions and spoke in speeds measured against sound itself. "Revenant 21, ready for taxi." "Revenant 21, taxi runway 23 right, hold short." The Super Hornet rolled forward, 30,000 pounds of precision engineering responding to her touch. In the backseat of her mind, she carried the faces of the SEALs she'd briefed, Morrison's expression when he'd recognized her call sign. They were trusting her with their lives tonight, the way that team in Helmand had trusted her. She wouldn't fail them. Not tonight. Not ever. The Super Hornet climbed through darkness, punching through scattered clouds at 12,000 feet. Raven leveled at 23,000, her radar painting the mountains ahead in shades of synthetic green. The night vision goggles turned the world into monochrome reality, stars above so bright they seemed close enough to touch, terrain below rendered in ghostly clarity. Revenant 2-1, checking in. She transmitted on the strike frequency, her voice calm as still water. On station, playtime 2+30, full combat load. Revenant 2-1, Jester 7. Morrison's voice carried the compressed tension of a man about to step into harm's way. 15 mics from objective, holding at grid November Victor 348721. Raven's eyes flicked to her moving map display, correlating Morrison's position with the objective. They were approaching from the southeast, using a wadi for concealment. Smart. Jester 7, Revenant copies. I'm holding 23,005 miles west of objective. No radar contacts, how copy? Good copy, Revenant. Weather's worse than briefed. Ceilings may be 6,000 here. She frowned, checking her own weather display. The forecast had been marginal, but if the ceiling was dropping to 6,000, her weapons employment envelope was shrinking. JDAMs needed altitude for their glide profile. She might have to go low with iron bombs and the gun. Jester 7 understands 6,000 ceiling. If I need to prosecute low altitude, I'll be loud. There was a pause, then Morrison's voice came back with something that might have been humor. Revenant, we'd rather have loud and accurate than quiet and useless. Copy that. Jester 7, be advised I'm picking up radio emissions bearing 030 from objective. Possible early warning radar, S-band frequency. She listened to the radar warning receivers chirp in her helmet, analyzing the pattern. Assessed as SA-6 search radar, not tracking. Jester understands. We'll keep our heads down. The minutes stretched as Raven orbited overhead, her sensors painting reality onto screens, her mind 3 steps ahead of the present moment, calculating angles and speeds and the geometry of violence. The explosion lit the valley like a camera flash frozen in time. Raven saw it through her targeting pod, a blossom of orange fire against black terrain, then the compound's walls backlit by interior flames. Morrison's voice came through tight with controlled aggression. Revenant, Jester 7. Troops in contact, taking fire from structures east and west of compound. Need immediate suppression. Grid November Victor 348745. She was already rolling in, punching coordinates into her weapons computer. Jester 7, Revenant has your position marked. Describe target. Eastern structure, 3-story stone building, muzzle flashes on roof and second floor. Danger close, friendlies at 100 meters east. 100 meters. In her world of gravity bombs and high explosive, that was breathing distance. Raven's hands moved with practiced calm, selecting a single GBU-12 laser-guided bomb, dialing in minimal yield settings. Jester 7, confirm friendlies clear of eastern structure. Friendlies clear, cleared hot. She rolled inverted, pulling the Super Hornet's nose toward Earth. The world wheeled around her, stars below, mountains above, her instruments the only reference that mattered. The targeting pod locked onto the building, its infrared sensor painting heat signatures in the windows. She could see the muzzle flashes Morrison had described, rapid strobing that meant automatic weapons, 20,000 feet, 18. The weapons computer displayed release parameters, green, green, green. Her thumb hovered over the pickle button. At 15,000 feet, she squeezed. Revenant rifle. The GBU-12 separated clean, its laser seeker head questing for reflected energy. Raven held the laser steady, designating the building's center mass, painting it with invisible light. She pulled hard, 4GS pressing her into the seat, climbing away from the valley floor that would kill her as surely as any missile. Jester 7, 20 seconds. Morrison didn't respond. The radio crackled with automatic weapons fire, shouts in the background, chaos translated into electromagnetic waves. Raven counted seconds, her eyes locked on the targeting pod display. The bomb fell true, following its cone of laser light with the single-minded purpose of physics and engineering. Impact. The building dissolved. Raven watched through the targeting pod as 3 stories of stone construction converted to dust and rubble, the explosion collapsing inward before the pressure wave blew out, tumbling walls like children's blocks. The heat signature bloomed white, then faded to red, then orange as fires took hold in the wreckage. For 5 seconds the radio carried only silence. Then Morrison's voice, rough with cordite and adrenaline. Revenant 2-1, Jester 7. Shack. Target destroyed, secondary explosion observed. You just saved our asses. Raven didn't celebrate. She was already scanning for new threats, her radar warning receiver chirping steadily as that S-band radar continued its patient search. Jester 7, continue mission. I'm still on station. The SEAL team pushed into the compound, their movements coordinated chaos translated into brief radio calls. Raven orbited overhead, invisible in the darkness, her sensors penetrating the night. She was their guardian angel, their ace in the hole, the thing that made asymmetric warfare work, overwhelming precision violence delivered from an untouchable realm. Then her radar warning receiver screamed. The tone shifted from chirp to wail, and her cockpit displays erupted with threat warnings. The SA-6 radar had gone from search to track, its beam locked onto her Super Hornet with the focused intensity of terminal guidance. Revenant 2-1 is spiked. She rolled hard right, punching out chaff and flares, watching her threat display as it calculated trajectories and probabilities. The SA-6 was a Soviet-era system, deadly but old, its missiles subsonic and reliant on radio command guidance. If she could break the radar lock, the missiles would go ballistic. She dropped into the clouds, the gray murk of water vapor swallowing her aircraft. Her altitude unwound, 20,018-15. The radar warning receiver continued its banshee wail. Revenant 2-1, Jester 7, status. Morrison's voice carried new tension. Revenant is defending against SA-6, standby. She couldn't see the missiles, but she knew they were coming, white contrails climbing through darkness, proximity fuses counting down to her death. At 12,000 feet, she broke left again, pulling 7 GS that compressed her lungs and narrowed her vision. The first missile passed 100 feet in front of her nose, a telephone pole riding a pillar of fire through the night sky. Raven saw it for perhaps a second, her brain barely registering its presence before it was past, detonating somewhere in the clouds above. The second missile was tracking better. Her radar warning receiver screamed different now, the tone indicating terminal homing. She'd broken the radar lock, but this missile had gone active, using its own seeker to follow her infrared signature. Raven chopped throttles, diving hard, trading altitude for speed and maneuverability. The Super Hornet accelerated through Mach 1 in the descent, shock waves rippling across control surfaces. She pumped out flares in rapid sequence, pop, 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 filling her wake with magnesium fires hotter than her engines. Revenant 2-1, say status. Morrison again, his voice tight. She couldn't answer. All her concentration focused on the missile behind her, tracking closer, its proximity fuse scanning for the right moment to detonate. 8,000 feet. 6,000. The clouds thinned, and suddenly she could see terrain, ridgelines and wadis painted in nightmare green through her goggles. She was too low, too fast, with a missile still tracking and a valley floor rising to meet her. Her hands moved with desperate precision, pulling the Super Hornet into a climbing turn so hard the airframe groaned. The missile followed, unable to match her turn radius. She felt it more than saw it, the flash behind her, the shockwave that kicked her aircraft sideways, the rattle of shrapnel against her empennage. The caution lights came alive in her cockpit, hydraulic pressure low, flight control system degraded, right engine temperature rising. Revenant 2-1, Jester 7, say again your status. Jester 7, Revenant took a hit. Aircraft is flyable, continuing mission. She kept her voice level, professional, even as her eyes scanned damage indicators and her hands made minute control inputs to test the aircraft's response. Morrison's silence spoke volumes. She'd just taken a missile hit, aircraft damaged, and her first thought was continuing the mission. That wasn't training. That was something else. Raven climbed back to altitude on 1.5 engines, nursing the Super Hornet like a wounded bird. The right engine was running hot, temperatures fluctuating into the yellow zone. Hydraulic pressure read 60% on one system, normal on the other too. Flight controls felt mushy, requiring more input than usual, but they worked. She was still in the fight. Revenant, Jester 7. Mission complete, we've got the package. Request immediate exfil support. Morrison's voice had lost all its earlier swagger, replaced by the flat calm of professionals in crisis mode. Jester 7, Revenant copies. What's your situation? We're moving to exfil LZ, but we've got company. Multiple technicals converging from the north. Count 5 vehicles, maybe 30 personnel. Raven pulled up the coordinates on her moving map, overlaying them with Morrison's position. The SEALs were moving through broken terrain toward a flat area large enough for helicopter extraction. The enemy vehicles were closing from multiple directions, trying to cut them off. Jester 7, I'm Winchester on laser-guided weapons. Remaining ordnance is dumb bombs and gun. Request clearance for low-altitude pass. There was a pause, and when Morrison spoke again, his voice carried something like awe. Revenant, you're flying a damaged aircraft. Recommend you RTB. We'll manage. Negative, Jester 7. You requested support, you've got it. Confirm friendlies clear of northern approach to your position. Another pause, longer this time. Then, friendlies clear. Revenant, you're cleared hot. She rolled in from 12,000 feet, her targeting pod locked on the lead technical, a Toyota pickup with what looked like a .50 caliber machine gun mounted in the bed. The vehicle was bouncing across rough terrain, throwing dust, its occupants invisible in the infrared wash. Raven selected her 20mm cannon, feeling the Super Hornet shudder as the hydraulic system spun up the Gatling gun. She dove steeper than regulations allowed, especially with a damaged aircraft, pulling the nose through to track the vehicle. At 4,000 feet, she opened fire. The M61 Vulcan cannon spoke with a buzzsaw roar, sending depleted uranium rounds downrange at 3,000 feet per second. Each round weighed half a pound. The first technical exploded, rounds walking through it from tail to engine block. The .50 caliber ammunition cooked off, adding secondary explosions that flipped the vehicle end over end. Raven pulled off hard left, feeling the damaged aircraft protest, then rolled in on the second vehicle. This one's driver saw her coming and tried to evade, spinning the wheel hard. It didn't matter. The cannon rounds found it anyway, a 2-second burst that reduced metal and flesh to scattered debris. She climbed away, her right engine now screaming temperature warnings. Jester 7 Revenant splashed 2 technicals, 3 remaining breaking contact to your west. Revenant, good hits, enemy is withdrawing. Morrison's voice carried relief and something else, respect earned in fire and blood. Chalk 2 is inbound, 3 minutes. Chalk 2 was the extraction helicopter, a Navy MH-60S that would swoop in, grab the SEALs, and disappear back into the night. Raven's job was to make sure it could do that safely. She circled overhead, watching the 3 remaining technicals retreat into the darkness, watching Morrison's team establish security around the landing zone. Her right engine temperature climbed into the red zone, the overheat warning wailing in her helmet. She silenced it with a button press, not because the danger wasn't real, but because there was nothing she could do about it until the SEALs were safe. Revenant 2-1, Chalk 2 is on the deck. 30 seconds. She watched through her targeting pod as the helicopter flared to landing, its rotors kicking up a dust storm. SEALs moved in organized chaos, loading casualties, equipment, their high-value prisoner. 20 seconds. 15. The enemy technicals had stopped retreating. They were turning around. Chalk 2, Revenant, be advised 3 vehicles inbound from the west. Recommend expedite departure. Chalk 2 copies, 10 seconds. Raven watched those vehicles accelerate, watched muzzle flashes erupt from their beds. They were too far to hit the helicopter yet, but in 10 seconds they wouldn't be. She made a decision. Her third gun pass was into the teeth of small arms fire. She came in low, 100 feet off the deck, her airspeed bleeding as she focused on the lead vehicle. The windscreen starred with a spiderweb of cracks as a bullet struck it. Raven flinched instinctively, then steadied, walking cannon fire across all three vehicles in a single sustained burst. The Vulcan ran dry with a mechanical click that sounded like a door slamming. All three technicals were burning. "Chalk 2 is off," Morrison transmitted. "Revenant, we owe you everything." Raven didn't respond. Her right engine had just quit, temperature limits exceeded, turbine blades seizing in superheated metal. The Super Hornet yawed hard right, trying to swap ends in midair. She fought it with rudder and aileron, converting altitude to energy, pointing the nose toward the distant coastline. "Revenant 2-1 is single-engine, egressing area." Her voice remained calm, that same flat professional tone she'd used all night. Only she knew her heart was hammering, her hands slick with sweat inside the flight gloves. The Super Hornet could fly on one engine, could even land on one engine, but it was a sick aircraft now, wounded and struggling. She climbed slowly, painfully, trading speed for altitude. 10,000 feet. 12. The coastline appeared in her goggles, blessed water that meant safety and carriers and recovery options. Behind her, the mountains of hostile territory receded into darkness. Chief Whitfield's voice crackled on the recovery frequency. "Revenant 2-1 home plate, we're tracking you. Say souls on board and fuel state." "Revenant is single seat, single engine, fuel at 4.2. "Revenant understands single engine. We're setting up for straighten approach, emergency equipment standing by. You're cleared straight to the numbers." She began her descent, running through emergency checklists, preparing for a landing that would require precision she barely had left. The Super Hornet shuddered and groaned around her, but it kept flying. She'd brought it home before on fumes and faith. She'd do it again, because Morrison and his team were safe, because she'd promised herself 5 years ago over Helmand Province that no one would die on her watch if she could help it, because this was who she was, Revenant, the one who came back. The runway lights at Naval Air Station Oceana cut the darkness like a jeweled path, 2,500 feet of salvation. Raven had the field in sight from 10 miles out, flying an approach profile that would have horrified any instructor, too fast, too high, compensating for an aircraft that wanted to roll right with every slight input. "Revenant 2-1 on final." Her voice remained steady. "Revenant 2-1, cleared to land runway 23 right. Wind is calm, emergency equipment in position." She could see them lining the runway, fire trucks, ambulances, crews in silver proximity suits, ready for the worst. The Super Hornet descended through 1,000 feet, 500, the runway threshold rising to meet her. The approach was wrong. She was carrying too much airspeed because the flight control computer wasn't compensating properly for asymmetric thrust, but she couldn't go around, not with this much damage. 200 feet. 100. The runway numbers flashed beneath her nose. She pulled power on the good engine, flared, maybe too much, the aircraft suddenly floating, then touched down hard. The landing gear compressed, groaned, held. She deployed the drag chute, feeling it blossom behind her and slow the wounded aircraft. 3,000 feet of runway remaining. 2,000. 1,000. The Super Hornet rolled to a stop 500 feet from the runway's end. Raven sat in the cockpit for a moment, her hands still on the controls, adrenaline leaching from her system in a wave that left her trembling. She completed the shutdown checklist from muscle memory, watching the instruments wind down, the cockpit lights dim. The canopy cracked open and cool night air washed over her. Chief Whitfield was first up the ladder, his face tight with concern that evaporated into relief when he saw her moving. "Commander, hell of a landing." Raven unstrapped, her fingers clumsy on buckles she normally released without thought. "How bad?" Whitfield gestured to the tail section. "Shrapnel damage, right engine's toast, hydraulics are leaking, and your windscreen's cracked. She'll need a week in the shop." He paused, then added quietly, "You brought her home, though. Not everyone could have done that." She climbed down, her legs unsteady on the ladder. Morrison was waiting at the bottom. The SEAL team leader stood at attention, his utilities still dusty from the desert, a cut above his left eye leaking blood he hadn't bothered to wipe away. The rest of his team flanked him, forming an honor corridor that stretched from Raven's aircraft to the hangar. She descended the ladder slowly, exhaustion evident in every movement. When her boots touched concrete, Morrison saluted, crisp, parade ground perfect, held long beyond regulation. "Commander Cowery," he said formally. "On behalf of Jester 7, thank you for bringing us home." Raven returned the salute, her own movements weighted with fatigue. "You got your target, Morrison, that's what matters." "No, ma'am." Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You took a missile hit, damaged aircraft, single engine, and you stayed on station. You made gun runs while we extracted. That's not duty, that's—" He searched for words, settled on inadequate truth. "That's extraordinary." The team behind him nodded, their expressions carrying a gravity she recognized. She'd seen it before, in the faces of the SEALs from Helmand Province, in the faces of anyone who'd been close enough to death to measure the distance. They understood what she'd done for them tonight, what she'd risked. "Helmand," Morrison continued. "5 years ago. That was you, wasn't it? Call sign Revenant 2-1. The pilot who made 3 passes through ground fire to support my squadron mates." Raven looked past him at her damaged aircraft, at the maintenance crews already swarming it with flashlights and damage assessment checklists. "Different team, same job," she said quietly. "And the 4th pass," Morrison pressed. "The one nobody clears, the one you made anyway." She met his eyes then, and for a moment the professional mask slipped. "I heard them dying on the radio. Heard them calling for help that wasn't coming fast enough. The rules said I was Winchester, said I was bingo fuel, said I should egress." Her voice hardened. "I didn't care about the rules. I cared about bringing them home." Morrison nodded slowly. "The pilot who pulled them out said you made that last run at 50 feet. Said your jet wash was blowing dust over their position. Said you were firing guns dry, that your cannon clicked empty while you were still holding the trigger." The ready room had filled while Raven was in the air. News traveled fast on military bases, especially news involving damaged aircraft and miraculous recoveries. Pilots from other squadrons stood against the walls, maintenance chiefs who'd worked on her Super Hornet ground crew who'd watched her take off and wondered if she'd come back. Morrison stood at the front, and when Raven entered, still in her flight suit with her helmet bag slung over one shoulder, the room came to attention. "As you were," she said quietly, but nobody sat. Morrison gestured to the tactical display, now showing a mission replay, her aircraft's tracks superimposed over terrain, weapon release points marked, the wild gyrations of her missile defense visible as corkscrewing lines through three-dimensional space. "I wanted the commander's squadron mates to understand what happened tonight," Morrison began. "Jester 7 inserted at 0300 to capture or kill a high-value target. Intelligence was good, mission went as planned until it didn't." He advanced the replay to the moment her first bomb had impacted. 30 seconds after initial breach, we were taking effective fire from multiple positions. Commander Cowery prosecuted her first target at danger close, 100 meters from friendly forces. The building was eliminated with a precision that probably saved 5 of my team members. A pilot in the front row, a lieutenant commander named Hayes, leaned forward. "What was the ordnance?" "GBU-12 laser-guided, 500-pound class," Hayes whistled low. "At 100 meters, that's surgical," Morrison nodded. "Then things got interesting. An SA-6 battery we hadn't identified locked her up. She defended while keeping us covered, took a missile proximity hit that damaged her right engine and hydraulics and still stayed on station." The room had gone very quiet. Every pilot there understood what Morrison was describing. A situation where egress was not just authorized but expected, where self-preservation overrode mission completion. Raven had stayed anyway. "When we requested exfil support," Morrison continued, "enemy forces were converging. Commander Cowery made 3 gun runs in a damaged aircraft, at low altitude, silencing enemy vehicles and allowing successful extraction." He paused, looking directly at Raven. "The 3rd pass was through active small arms fire." Hayes found Raven in the paraloft an hour later. She was repacking her survival vest with the meticulous care of someone trying to think about anything except the mission she'd just flown. The other pilot entered quietly, settling onto the bench across from her. "Hell of a night," Hayes offered. Raven continued packing, not looking up. "Standard CAS mission. Team needed support, I provided it. Standard missions don't result in damaged aircraft and emergency landings." Hayes's tone was gentle, probing. They do if you stay on station when you should egress. She finally looked up, and Hayes saw the exhaustion in her eyes, not physical tiredness, but something deeper. Morrison told us about Helmand, Hayes said, about why they call you Revenant. The word hung between them. Revenant, one who returns from death, a ghost with unfinished business. The call sign had started as gallows humor among the squadron mates who'd debriefed her after Helmand Province, who'd seen her aircraft's battle damage and wondered how she'd survived. It had stuck because it fit. She came back from missions that should have killed her, came back for teammates when everyone else had written them off. That was 5 years ago, Raven said quietly. Different war, different mission. Same pilot, though. Same decision to stay when you could have left. Hayes leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. I've been flying Super Hornets for 8 years. I've done CAS interdiction, fleet defense. I'm good at my job, but what you did tonight, he shook his head. That's something else. That's not training or skill. He searched for the right word. That's commitment that scares me a little. Raven sealed her vest, setting it aside with deliberate care. In Helmand, I was on a routine patrol when the call came in. SEAL team ambushed, casualties, requesting immediate air support. I was closest, but I was also Winchester on precision weapons, had some iron bombs and a quarter load of 20 Mike. She stared past Hayes, seeing something 5 years distant. The JTAC, Joint Terminal Attack Controller, was 23 years old. I could hear it in his voice. The fear. The knowledge they were about to be overrun. The memory unspooled in Raven's mind with the crystalline clarity of trauma never fully processed. She continued speaking, her voice distant, as if she were describing someone else's experience. The JTAC was calling for any available air. He had 15 SEALs pinned in a compound, surrounded by approximately 80 insurgents. No American QRF close enough. No artillery in range. Just me, 17 miles away with minimal ordnance and fuel for maybe 40 minutes on station. Hayes remained silent, understanding this wasn't a story she told often. I told him I was inbound 2 minutes. He copied, then said something I'll never forget. Revenant, if you can't help us, tell my mom I tried. He was that certain they were dying. She looked down at her hands, seeing them steady now, though they'd shaken for hours after Helmand. I came in low, maybe 70 feet AGL, because they needed to know someone was there. The terrain was garbage, wadis and compounds, no clear firing lanes. I put my first bomb into the largest concentration of insurgents, maybe 30 meters from the friendly compound, too close by any standard. How close did it impact? Hayes asked. 28 meters. I saw the explosion through my targeting pod, saw the compound's walls flex from the pressure wave, but it broke the assault. Her jaw tightened. Then I made 11 more passes. Used my remaining bombs, went to guns, exhausted the ammunition drum. The final passes were dry, no ordnance left, but they didn't know that. I made noise, broke their morale, kept them scattered until the QRF arrived. Hayes did the math. 11 passes over a hot landing zone. How many times were you hit? 17 holes in the airframe when I landed at Bagram. The right engine quit during taxi, hydraulics were gone, I had maybe 3 minutes of fuel remaining. She met his eyes. But all 15 SEALs got out. The JTAC's mom didn't get a folded flag, that's what mattered. Is that why you stayed tonight? Why you always stay? Raven was quiet for a long moment. Because I know what it's like to need help that doesn't come. Because I can hear the fear in their voices. Because if I egress when I still have options, someone dies who shouldn't. The sun rose over Naval Air Station Oceana, turning the sky from black to gray to pale blue. Raven stood on the flight line, watching maintenance crews work on her Super Hornet in the morning light. The damage looked worse in daylight. The tail section peppered with shrapnel, the right engine access panels open to reveal heat-warped turbine blades, hydraulic fluid stains marking the concrete beneath the fuselage. Chief Whitfield approached with a clipboard and the expression of someone delivering news that was neither good nor entirely bad. Preliminary assessment, Commander. The engine's totaled, needs complete replacement. Flight control actuators in the tail are damaged, we're pulling them for inspection. Hydraulic system Charlie took shrapnel, it's compromised. And your windscreen obviously needs replacement. He paused, consulting his notes. "We're looking at minimum 7 days before she's airworthy. Maybe 10 if we find more damage during teardown." Raven nodded slowly, her eyes tracing the scars her aircraft had taken. "The airframe structure, remarkably clean. You brought her back without overstressing anything critical. A less skilled pilot might have ripped the wings off pulling those GS during the missile defense." Whitfield's voice carried professional admiration. "You flew her exactly right, Commander. She got me home, Chief. That's what matters." Morrison emerged from the hangar, walking with the particular stiffness of someone who'd spent the last 6 hours being debriefed by intelligence officers. He'd showered and changed into fresh utilities, but his eyes still carried the operation's weight. "Commander," he greeted, "wanted to catch you before you went off duty." Raven turned from her aircraft, reading something in Morrison's expression. "What is it?" "My team lead wants to put you in for an award. Distinguished Flying Cross, possibly higher." The mission recorder captured everything: the danger close support, the missile defense, staying on station with a damaged bird. He hesitated. "Also the 3-gun runs through ground fire." "No." Her response was immediate and flat. "No awards." Morrison blinked. "Ma'am, with respect, what you did deserves recognition. You saved 8 lives last night." "I did my job. That doesn't require a medal." Morrison didn't retreat, meeting her gaze with the stubborn persistence of someone who decided something was right regardless of opposition. "Commander, let me be direct. In the special operations community, we track pilots. We know who's reliable, who's exceptional, who'll stay when things go sideways. Your name is at the top of that list." He gestured toward the damaged Super Hornet. "You think last night was unique? I made calls. There are 4 other SEAL teams with stories about Revenant 2-1. 4 other missions where you stayed past bingo fuel, past Winchester, past any reasonable expectation of support." Raven's expression hardened. "Those were mission requirements, nothing more. Mission requirements don't explain making a gun run at 50 feet through small arms fire. They don't explain taking a missile hit and staying on station. They don't explain," Morrison's voice caught slightly, "they don't explain a pilot willing to die to bring us home." "I wasn't willing to die," Raven corrected quietly. "I was willing to risk dying. There's a difference." "Is there?" Morrison challenged. "Because from where my team was standing last night, watching you defend against SAMs while providing us cover, it looked like you'd made a choice. Our lives mattered more than yours." The accusation hung between them, harsh in morning light. Raven was silent for a long moment, her eyes distant. "In Helmand," she finally said, "after I landed at Bagram on fumes with a dead engine, the squadron commander debriefed me, asked why I'd stayed so long, risked so much. I told him I had ordnance and fuel, therefore I had capability, therefore I had responsibility." She looked at Morrison directly. "He said I was either the bravest pilot he'd known or the most damaged. Maybe both." Morrison's expression softened. "What happened to you, Commander? What makes a person fly like you do?" "That's not your concern, Lieutenant Commander." Her tone had shifted, becoming formal, distant, a wall rising between them. "My flying speaks for itself. My reasons are my own." She turned back toward the hangar, dismissing him, but Morrison spoke again. "The JTAC from Helmand, the one who called for help, that was my little brother, Commander." Raven stopped walking. For several heartbeats she stood perfectly still, her back to Morrison, processing what he'd just revealed. When she turned, her carefully maintained composure had cracked, revealing something raw beneath. "Your brother," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. Morrison nodded, his own emotions evident now. "Petty Officer Second Class Daniel Morrison. He was the JTAC that day. 23 years old, first deployment, scared out of his mind but doing his job." He stepped closer, his words coming faster, pressured by 5 years of carried weight. "He told me about you, about the pilot who showed up when everyone else said no air was available, about the bombs that landed so close he felt the heat wash over him, about the 11 passes you made, even after you'd run dry on ammunition." Morrison's voice thickened. "He said you saved his life. Said he watched you make that final pass at 50 feet, so low he could see your aircraft's belly, and he knew you were flying on nothing but fumes and stubbornness. He said that's when he understood what it meant to have someone refuse to abandon you." Raven's eyes had gone bright, moisture gathering at the corners. "Daniel Morrison," I remember his voice. He was calm, professional, even when— She paused, swallowing hard. Even when he thought he was dying. He gave me perfect coordinates, perfect target descriptions, made my job easier when his job was impossible. He got out of the Navy 2 years later, Morrison continued. The firefight, the casualties, it stayed with him. PTSD, survivor's guilt, the whole package. But he also got married, has a daughter now, teaches high school history in Colorado. Morrison's voice dropped to barely audible. He's alive because you didn't leave. Because you decided his life mattered more than regulations, more than fuel requirements, more than your own safety. Raven turned away, looking at her damaged aircraft, at the morning sun glinting off scarred metal. "I'm glad he made it. That's what matters." "It's not all that matters," Morrison pressed. "You need to understand what you mean to the people you've saved. You're not just another pilot. You're the person who comes when everyone else says it's impossible." The squadron-ready room felt different when Raven entered for the afternoon brief. The usual casual chaos, pilots reviewing flight plans, discussing tactics, telling stories with their hands tracing aerial maneuvers, had been replaced by something more formal. The room was packed, standing room only, with faces she recognized and many she didn't. Her squadron commander, Captain Richard Stones Martinez, stood at the front beside a projection screen showing her aircraft number. When she entered, he called the room to attention. "As you were," Raven said automatically, but felt the weight of their collective gaze, the knowledge that something was happening beyond her control. "Commander Cowery," Captain Martinez began formally, "we're here to discuss your actions during last night's mission in support of naval special warfare. Before we begin the tactical debrief, I want to address something." He gestured to the crowd. "Word spreads fast in the aviation community. What you did last night, staying on station with a damaged aircraft, making multiple gun runs through ground fire, that's exceptional airmanship. But more than that, it's emblematic of who you are as a pilot." Martinez pulled up mission footage, the Super Hornet's tracks overlaid on terrain. "I've been a naval aviator for 22 years. I've flown combat missions over 3 different conflicts. I thought I'd seen every kind of pilot. The natural flyers, the by-the-book professionals, the aggressive attackers, the defensive technicians." He paused, looking directly at Raven. "Then I met you. You're something different. You're the pilot who makes decisions that should be impossible, who stays when staying means risking everything, who treats every mission like someone's life depends on your performance because it does." A voice from the back, Commander Lisa Torch, Washington, another Super Hornet pilot with multiple combat deployments, spoke up. "Skipper, if I may. I've flown with Commander Cowery for 3 years. I've watched her brief missions with a level of detail that borders on obsessive. She knows radio frequencies we might need before we need them, knows the weapons effects of ordnance combinations we'd never consider using, knows emergency procedures for aircraft systems most pilots don't think about." Torch stepped forward, addressing the room. "She's also the first pilot to volunteer for danger close support missions, the last pilot to leave a combat area, and the only pilot I've ever seen who reviews mission tapes looking specifically for her mistakes." "Why does she do it?" someone asked from the crowd, a junior pilot, an ensign fresh from flight school who looked at Raven like she was examining an equation that didn't balance. Raven herself remained silent, standing near the back wall, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The question hung in the air until Hayes spoke, his voice carrying across the ready room. "Because she understands something most pilots don't. We talk about mission accomplishment, about tactical excellence, about bringing our aircraft home safely. Commander Cowery talks about bringing people home safely. The people we're supporting, the teammates who depend on us, the ground forces who need our help." He looked at Raven. "She flies like every bomb she drops, every gun run she makes, might be the difference between someone living or dying, because she's been there when it was." Captain Martinez nodded slowly. "Which brings us to the real reason for this brief. Commander Cowery, I've received a request from Naval Special Warfare Group 2. They're asking for you specifically to support an operation next month. High-risk interdiction, Tier 1 target, bad weather expected. He paused significantly. They've requested you by name. Not a Super Hornet pilot, not carrier air wing support. They want Revenant 2-1 specifically. The room had gone silent. Personal requests for specific pilots were rare, usually reserved for only the most critical missions or the most trusted relationships. For SEAL teams to request a particular pilot meant something profound. It meant they trusted her more than their own training, their own capabilities, their own luck. "What's the mission?" Raven asked quietly. Martinez shook his head. "Classified, need to know. If you accept, you'll be read in separately." He studied her face, looking for something. "You can decline. You're still on light duty from last night's mission. Your regular aircraft won't be flight-ready for at least a week, and honestly, you've earned the rest." Raven looked around the ready room at the faces of pilots she'd flown with, trained with, trusted with her life. She saw respect there and concern and something else, a kind of awe that made her uncomfortable. These were her peers, her colleagues. She didn't want them looking at her like she was somehow different. "When do they need an answer?" she asked. "Now would be good." Morrison waited outside the ready room, leaning against the wall with the patient stillness of someone who'd spent his career waiting. For intelligence, for insertion, for the moment when planning became action. When Raven emerged, he straightened. "Commander, got a minute?" She gestured down the hall, and they walked away from the ready room's noise, finding privacy in an empty maintenance office that smelled of hydraulic fluid and old coffee. Morrison closed the door, then turned to face her. "I heard about the mission request. JSOC wants you for Operation Granite Shield." He raised a hand before she could speak. "I know it's classified, but I'm read in. I'm the ground force commander." Raven leaned against a desk, studying him. "Why me specifically? You've got access to every strike pilot in naval aviation." "Because of what happened last night. Because of what happened in Helmand. Because in the last 5 years, you've supported 8 special operations missions, and all 8 had 0 friendly casualties despite high-risk environments." Morrison's voice was intense, urgent. "Because when my teammates are on the ground in a bad situation, I want the pilot who'll stay until everyone's safe, not the pilot who'll follow regulations and leave when fuel says they should." "That's not fair to other pilots," Raven countered. "They're professionals. They follow procedures for good reasons." "I know. And 99% of the time, that's exactly right. But there's a 1% of missions where following procedures means people die. Helmand was one of those missions. Last night was one of those missions." Morrison stepped closer, his expression grave. "Granite Shield has the potential to be one of those missions. We're going after a target who's directly responsible for killing American service members. The intelligence is time-sensitive, the location is compromised, and the weather window is marginal." Raven understood what he wasn't saying. "You expect it to go wrong. I expect it to be challenging. I expect we'll need every advantage. Having you on station, knowing that if things go sideways, there's a pilot overhead who will move heaven and earth to bring us home, that's an advantage I won't give up." She was quiet for a long moment, her mind running through tactical calculations and risk assessments, weighing capability against probability, skill against luck. Morrison watched her think, seeing the internal process play out in minute changes of expression. "Tell me about Granite Shield," she finally said. Morrison pulled out a tablet, calling up satellite imagery that he wasn't technically supposed to show her until she'd formally accepted the mission. "Target is Ibrahim al-Rashid, confirmed planner behind 3 attacks on coalition forces. He's holed up in a compound in the Korangal Valley. You remember that area?" Raven nodded. "The Korangal was called the Valley of Death for good reasons. Mountainous terrain that funneled aircraft into predictable patterns, limited landing zones, and a population that had been hostile to foreign forces for decades. Tell says he'll be at this location for 72 hours maximum, then he's moving to Pakistan where we can't touch him. The weather forecast is terrible, low ceilings, possible thunderstorms, visibility under a mile." Morrison zoomed the imagery, showing defensive positions. "He's got security, maybe 20 personnel, small arms and RPGs. The compound sits at the base of a ridgeline that limits our approach options." "Air defense?" Raven asked, her mind already working the tactical problem. No confirmed systems, but we're in range of several mobile SA-7 sites. Expect MANPADS threat. Man-portable air defense systems, shoulder-fired missiles that had killed more aircraft than anyone liked to admit. Less capable than the SA-6 that had nearly killed her last night, but just as deadly if you were unlucky. When's the op window? 4 days. New moon, minimal ambient light. Insertion at 0200 local. Morrison looked at her directly. I need to know you're in, Commander. Because if you're not, I need to find alternatives, and honestly, there aren't many alternatives I trust. Raven stared at the satellite imagery, at the compound that would soon be filled with violence and chaos, at the terrain that had swallowed so many helicopters and aircraft and lives. She thought about Daniel Morrison, teaching high school in Colorado because he'd survived when he shouldn't have. She thought about the SEALs from last night, safe because she'd stayed. She thought about all the missions where her refusal to quit had made the difference between tragedy and triumph. The decision wasn't really a decision. It had been made 5 years ago over Helmand Province, made in the moment she'd heard fear in a young JTAC's voice and decided his life mattered more than her fuel gauge. It had been reinforced with every mission since, every time she'd pushed past limits that other pilots respected, every time she'd chosen protecting lives over protecting herself. I'm in, she said quietly. Morrison's relief was visible. Thank you, Commander. I'll arrange the formal briefing for tomorrow morning, 0800. Full operational details, threat assessment, escape and evasion plans. He paused. Your aircraft will be ready by then. Chief Whitfield says 7 days minimum. I'll fly a different Super Hornet if necessary. No, Morrison's voice was firm. You'll fly your aircraft, the one you know inside and out. I'll have my commander reach out to your maintenance chief, see if we can expedite repairs. Money's not an issue for this operation, neither is priority on parts. Raven raised an eyebrow. What's the funding code on Granite Shield? Tier 1 direct action, JSOC authorized, which means if your maintenance chief needs a new engine delivered by tomorrow, a helicopter will bring it from wherever it currently exists. Morrison allowed himself a small smile. The military can move remarkably fast when properly motivated. She shook her head, almost amused despite the mission's weight. You're asking a lot, Morrison, from me, from my maintenance crew, from everyone involved. I know, but I've learned something in 10 years of special operations. When you find people who are exceptional at their jobs, you do whatever it takes to get them on your team. You're exceptional, Commander, the kind of exceptional that saves lives. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of the upcoming mission settling over both of them. Finally, Raven pushed off from the desk. 4 days to prep, then we do this. But Morrison understands something. I'll support your mission with everything I have, but I'm not invincible. That missile last night came close, closer than I want to think about. I know, he said softly, and I wouldn't ask if there was another option, but there isn't. She nodded once, accepting the burden, then turned toward the door. Morrison's voice stopped her. Commander, thank you for Helmand, for last night, for this. The maintenance hangar at 0300 was a cathedral of fluorescent light and focused activity. Chief Whitfield supervised a crew of 12, working with the coordinated precision of a surgical team. The damaged Super Hornet occupied the center of the space, panels removed, systems exposed, looking more like an anatomical diagram than an aircraft. Raven entered quietly, not wanting to disturb their work, but Whitfield spotted her immediately. Commander, thought you'd be getting rack time. Couldn't sleep, she admitted, approaching her aircraft. Up close, the damage looked catastrophic. The right engine bay empty where the turbine assembly had been removed, hydraulic lines disconnected and capped, the tail section partially disassembled. How bad is it, Chief? Really? Whitfield wiped his hands on a rag, considering his answer. Bad enough that normal procedures would have this bird down for 2 weeks, maybe 3. But I got a call from someone very senior explaining that normal procedures were suspended, that your aircraft needed to be flight-ready in 72 hours, and that cost was no object. He gestured to crates stacked near the hangar wall. That's a brand-new F414 engine, fresh from depot, arrived 4 hours ago via C-17 direct from North Island. Those pallets contain new hydraulic components, flight control actuators, and a windscreen that was literally pulled from another aircraft at Lemoore. Raven stared at the equipment, understanding the massive logistical effort that had been mobilized. This is for Granite Shield. Figured as much. Don't know what the mission is, don't want to know. But someone important thinks you're critical, and honestly, Commander, I agree. Whitfield's voice softened. I've been maintaining naval aircraft for 30 years. I've worked with hundreds of pilots. You're different. You treat these machines like they're alive, like they're partners instead of tools. He patted the Super Hornet's fuselage with genuine affection. And this bird has brought you home from missions that should have killed you. She deserves the best maintenance I can provide. One of the younger technicians, an airman working on the hydraulic system, spoke up. Chief, the starboard flight control actuator shows microfractures under X-ray, probably from the high-G maneuvering during missile defense. It's still within tolerance, but barely. Whitfield examined the X-ray images on a tablet, his experienced eyes reading metal fatigue like a text. Pull it. Install new. I don't care if it's within tolerance. The commander's taking this aircraft into a high-threat environment, and I won't have a component failure because we accepted good enough. He looked at Raven. Ma'am, I need you to understand something. We're going through this aircraft with a level of detail we normally reserve for post-mishap investigations. Every component that took stress during last night's mission, we're inspecting, testing, and replacing if there's even a hint of compromise. That's going to take more than 72 hours, Raven observed. Not with the crew I've assembled. I pulled in every senior technician on base, called in favors, got personnel from other squadrons on temporary assignment. We've got 12 of the best aircraft maintainers in naval aviation working round-the-clock shifts. Whitfield's pride was evident. They're doing it for you, Commander, because every one of them knows pilots who haven't come back. Every one of them understands that good maintenance is the difference between life and death, and every one of them wants to make sure you come back from this mission. Raven felt emotion tighten her throat. Chief, I don't know what to say. Say you'll fly this aircraft like you always do, with skill and judgment and that particular brand of courage that makes you stay when you should leave. He smiled slightly. And try to bring her back with fewer holes this time. My maintenance logs are starting to read like combat action reports. She walked around the aircraft, observing the work in progress. Technicians crawled over and through the fuselage, their movements practiced and efficient. Tools sparked against metal. Hydraulic fluid smell mixed with electrical insulation and turbine oil, the distinctive scent of deep maintenance. Near the nose gear, she found the bullet holes from last night's final gun run, 3 neat punctures where rounds had entered the fuselage, somehow missing critical systems by inches. How close was this one? She asked, pointing. Whitfield examined it with a flashlight. 2 inches from your primary flight control computer. If that had been hit, you'd have lost all fly-by-wire capability. The aircraft would have been barely controllable. The briefing room for Operation Granite Shield was different from normal squadron spaces. No windows, electronic device lockers at the entrance, guards checking identification before entry. Raven arrived at 07:45, early by civilian standards but late by military ones. Morrison was already there, along with 10 other personnel, SEAL team members, intelligence officers, a weather forecaster, and a senior officer she recognized as a 3-star admiral from Naval Special Warfare Command. Everyone stood when the admiral entered. Seats, he said curtly, and the room settled. Operation Granite Shield is authorized for execution on November 8th at 0200 local time. Mission is capture or kill of Ibrahim al-Rashid, confirmed high-value target. Commander Cowery, you'll provide on-station close air support from H-hour through exfil plus 30 minutes. The Admiral gestured to the tactical display. This operation is high risk for several reasons. First, the target location in Korangal Valley provides limited approach options. Second, weather will be marginal, low ceilings, possible precipitation. Third, the time-sensitive nature means we're compressing normal mission planning from weeks into days. He looked directly at Raven. Lieutenant Commander Morrison specifically requested you for this operation based on your performance history. I approved that request because the mission profile matches your particular skill set. Low-altitude precision strikes in degraded weather with high collateral damage concerns. However, I need to be clear. This mission is dangerous. If at any point you assess the risk as unacceptable, you're authorized to abort air support. The ground force has contingency plans. Raven nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. If she pulled off station, the SEALs would likely have to extract without completing the mission, or worse, fight their way out against overwhelming odds. The Admiral continued for another 40 minutes, detailing intelligence updates, rules of engagement, weapons authorization, and emergency procedures. When he finished, he departed with the security escort, leaving Morrison to conduct the tactical brief. Morrison pulled up three-dimensional terrain mapping. Approach to the objective is through this valley system. The compound sits here, with ridgelines on three sides providing natural defensive positions. We'll insert via two MH-47s at Landing Zone Hawk, approximately 2 kilometers from target. Morrison's laser pointer traced routes on the tactical display. Info route follows this Wadi system, providing cover from observation. Our assault will be 3 teams. Alpha takes the main compound, Bravo secures the northern approach, Charlie establishes blocking positions to prevent escape. He zoomed in on the compound itself. Structure is single-story, thick walls, minimal windows. We anticipate 15 to 20 security personnel, likely armed with AKs and RPGs. Intelligence suggests Al-Rashid sleeps in the western room but will clear the entire building. His eyes found Raven. Commander, your priority targets are any vehicles attempting to reinforce from the village, which is here, about 3 kilometers north. Secondary targets are any defensive positions that engage our assault force. Tertiary mission is providing overwatch during exfil. Weapons load, Raven asked, her mind already calculating. Your choice, but recommend mix of precision and area weapons. The compound is danger close to civilian structures. I'll take 4 GBU-54s, 2 GBU-12s, and a full load of 20mm. The GBU-54s give me GPS or laser guidance, better flexibility if weather degrades my targeting pod. Morrison nodded approval. Time on station. I'll launch from Bagram at H-hour-45, arrive on station at H-hour-15. That gives me 3+ hours of playtime with 1 tanker rendezvous scheduled. She paused, considering fuel management. If I need to go low altitude for weapons delivery, that playtime decreases significantly. Understood. We've arranged for a backup tanker to be airborne, call sign Texaco 7. Morrison pulled up communications architecture. Primary frequency is this, backup is here. JTAC will be Sergeant Chen, call sign Hammer 14. He's experienced, done 6 deployments, knows how to talk to fast movers. The weather officer, a lieutenant commander with the weary look of someone who'd studied too many bad forecasts, stood next. The weather is our biggest challenge. Current forecast calls for scattered clouds at mission start, but a weather front is moving through the region. By 0400, we're expecting ceilings to drop to 4,000 feet AGL, visibility to 1 mile, possible rain. She displayed satellite imagery. If the front moves faster than predicted, conditions could deteriorate during the mission. Commander Cowery, you need to be prepared for instrument approaches and potentially degraded targeting. Raven spent the afternoon in the simulator, flying profiles that matched Operation Granite Shield's parameters. The Koringal Valley materialized in synthetic vision, ridgelines and compounds rendered in digital precision, threat systems placed according to intelligence estimates. She flew the approach 15 times, varying her altitude, speed, and attack geometry. Each run taught her something, where the terrain masked her aircraft from ground observation, where the ridgelines funneled her into predictable patterns, where she could establish holding patterns that kept her on station but survivable. The simulator could only approximate reality, but it burned the terrain into her memory, created muscle memory pathways that would function even when adrenaline and fear made thinking difficult. Hayes joined her for the final runs, flying as her wingman in a second simulator cockpit. They developed tactics, one aircraft high for overwatch and laser designation, one low for weapons delivery. They practiced radio communications until their calls were instinctive, practiced formation flying in confined terrain until they could maintain position without visual reference. "You're flying this like you expect it to go wrong," Hayes observed after the 12th run. Raven didn't dispute it. "Morrison's ground force is exceptional, but they're assaulting a defended compound at night in bad weather. Something will go wrong. My job is to be ready when it does. Your job is to provide air support, not to save the world." Hayes's voice carried concern. "I know you feel responsible for everyone on that objective, but Raven, you can't control everything. Sometimes missions fail despite our best efforts." She pulled off her helmet, running fingers through sweat-dampened hair. "Helmand, if I'd left when fuel said I should, 15 people would have died. Last night, if I'd egressed when I took the missile hit, Morrison's team might have been overrun during exfil. I know I can't control everything, but I can control my decisions, and I've decided that I won't leave until everyone's safe." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "What happens when you can't save them? When the mission goes so wrong that staying gets you killed and doesn't help them?" "Then I tried," Raven said simply. "That's all anyone can ask." Chief Whitfield found her in the paraloft at midnight, 3 days before the mission. The hangar lights had dimmed to night settings, casting long shadows across the maintenance floor where her Super Hornet now sat reassembled, its new engine installed, hydraulic lines connected, systems tested and retested. "She's ready, Commander," Whitfield said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a job completed to impossible standards. "We finished systems checks an hour ago. All diagnostics green, engine runs perfect, flight controls within 0.05% of specification." Raven looked through the paraloft window at her aircraft, seeing it transformed, panels sealed, surfaces cleaned, ready for war. "Chief, I don't know how to thank you. 72 hours for a repair that should have taken weeks." "Thank us by bringing her back," Whitfield interrupted gently. "Bring her back, bring yourself back, and tell me about the mission someday when it's declassified." He handed her a maintenance log, signed and certified, documenting every repair, every test, every component replacement. "I want you to know something, Commander. In 30 years of maintenance, I've never seen a crew work like they worked on your aircraft. No complaints about the hours, no cutting corners to meet the timeline. Every technician understood they were preparing an aircraft that would go into combat, and they treated it accordingly." His voice grew quieter. "They also understood they were preparing your aircraft specifically, because you've earned a reputation, Commander. The pilot who doesn't quit, who brings everyone home. That means something to the enlisted personnel who keep these birds flying." Raven felt the weight of expectation settling over her like a physical thing. "What if I fail? What if the mission goes wrong and I can't fix it? Then you fail having tried everything possible. That's all anyone can do." Whitfield smiled slightly. "But between you and me, I don't think you know how to fail. I think you'll fly that mission like you've flown every mission, with skill and judgment and that stubborn refusal to accept defeat that makes you who you are." She signed the maintenance log, accepting the aircraft formally. "I'll do my best, Chief." "Your best has saved a lot of lives, Commander. It'll be enough." The night before Operation Granite Shield, Raven couldn't sleep. She lay in her quarters at Bagram Airfield, listening to the distant sound of helicopters and cargo planes, the constant rhythm of military operations that never truly stopped. At 0200, she gave up pretending and went to the maintenance hangar. Her Super Hornet sat on the flight line, configured for combat with precision weapons hung beneath its wings. She performed her pre-flight check by flashlight, running hands over control surfaces and panel seams, checking things that maintenance had already checked, creating a ritual that centered her mind and pushed away fear. The aircraft felt solid, ready, eager almost. Anthropomorphizing machines was irrational, but every pilot did it, invested their aircraft with personality and will. Morrison appeared from the darkness, his own insomnia driving him to similar routines. He carried his gear, weapon, helmet, the tools of his trade just as she carried throttle and stick. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much thinking," Raven admitted. running scenarios, planning for contingencies, worrying about weather and threats and all the variables I can't control. Want to know a secret? Morrison set down his gear, leaning against the landing gear. I'm scared. Every mission, no matter how much training, how good the intelligence, how capable my team, I'm scared something will go wrong, that I'll make a mistake that gets someone killed. Raven looked at him with new understanding. How do you function with that fear? I trust my training, I trust my team, and I trust the people supporting us. He gestured toward her aircraft. I trust that when we need help, Revenant 2-1 will be overhead, ready to bring the hammer down. That trust lets me function despite the fear. She was quiet, processing this. Morrison continued. My brother Daniel from Helmand, he told me something after he got out. He said the PTSD, the nightmares, the survivor's guilt, all of that was manageable because he knew someone had fought for him. You'd made those passes, taken those risks, stayed until they were safe. That knowledge that someone cared enough to risk their life for his, it gave his survival meaning. Morrison's voice grew intense. That's what you don't understand, Commander. You're not just a pilot providing air support. You're proof that we matter, that our lives are worth fighting for, worth risking everything to preserve. The mission brief at 0600 was terse, professional, stripped of emotion. Intelligence updates confirmed Al-Rashid was at the target location. Whether updates confirmed the front was moving faster than predicted, they'd likely face degraded conditions during exfil. Rules of engagement were reviewed, call signs confirmed, emergency procedures established. Raven sat with Morrison's SEAL team, feeling the weight of their attention. They knew who she was now, knew her reputation. Some of that knowledge came from Morrison, but some came from the military's informal communication network. The stories that spread through ready rooms and team rooms, the legends that grew around certain individuals. Commander, one of the SEALs, a senior chief named Rodriguez, spoke up. Want you to know something. My team was in Ramadi in 2018, pinned down by sniper fire, extraction impossible. We had a Navy pilot, different squadron, who was supposed to provide support. She stayed on station for 3 hours past her fuel timeline, made precision strikes that let us break contact. Never learned her name, just her call sign. He paused. Revenant 2-1, that was you, wasn't it? Raven nodded slowly. Ramadi, I remember. You were in an urban environment, high collateral damage risk. Had to use small diameter bombs, minimum blast radius. You probably saved 8 lives that day, Rodriguez said quietly. Wanted to thank you 5 years late. Another SEAL spoke. Afghanistan 2019. My team was ambushed during a reconnaissance patrol. Pilots stayed on station despite taking ground fire, provided cover while we evac'd wounded. Revenant 2-1. The stories continued, emerging from different team members. Raven listened with growing understanding. She'd touched more lives than she'd realized, made more differences than she'd understood. Each mission she'd flown, each decision to stay, each risk she'd taken had rippled outward, affecting people she'd never met, creating cascading consequences she'd never fully comprehend. Morrison let his team speak, understanding they needed this, needed to tell her she mattered, needed to make visible the invisible impact of her choices. When they finished, he stood. Wheels up in 2 hours. Get your gear ready, conduct final checks, take care of any personal business. And remember, we have the best air support in naval aviation overhead tonight. The Super Hornet climbed through darkness, Raven's hands light on the controls as the aircraft accelerated toward the mountains. Her radar painted terrain ahead, the Hindu Kush rising like frozen waves, peaks reaching above 20,000 feet, valleys dark and forbidding. She checked in with the AWACS controller, received confirmation of her clearance into the operational area, then switched to the strike frequency. Any station, Revenant 2-1 checking in on station in 15 mics. Morrison's voice came back immediately. Revenant, Jester 7. Inbound to landing zone Hawk, 10 mics out. His transmission carried tension. The helicopters were approaching the most dangerous part of insertion, when they were committed but not yet on the ground. Raven adjusted her orbit, positioning herself to observe the landing zone with her targeting pod. The infrared sensor painted the valley in shades of white and black, revealing terrain that was invisible to naked eyes in the darkness. She saw the two MH-47 Chinooks approaching low, following the valley floor, their heat signatures bright against cool terrain. Jester 7, Revenant has visual on your chalk. Landing zone appears clear, no heat signatures within 1 kilometer. Revenant copies, commencing insertion. The helicopters flared simultaneously, their rotors creating dust storms that obscured everything. Raven maintained her vigil, scanning the surrounding terrain for threats, ready to engage anything that appeared. The insertion took 40 seconds, seals fast-roping to the ground, equipment following, the helicopters lifting and banking away before their signatures could draw effective fire. Jester 7 is feet dry, Morrison transmitted. Moving to objective. Raven watched through her targeting pod as the SEAL teams moved through the valley, their formation tactical and professional. They covered 2 kilometers in 20 minutes, using terrain and darkness for concealment, approaching the compound from the south where intelligence suggested the lightest security. At H-2 Morrison's voice came through. Revenant, Jester 7 is in position. Stand by for assault. Revenant is standing by. Her hands rested ready on throttle and stick, her eyes scanning both the targeting pod display and the terrain ahead, her mind 3 steps into the future, preparing for violence not yet manifest. The assault began with controlled chaos, flashbangs detonating, door charges blowing, automatic weapons fire stitching the night. Raven watched through her targeting pod as Morrison's teams flowed through the compound with practiced efficiency, clearing rooms, securing prisoners, searching for Al-Rashid. For 90 seconds it was textbook, perfect execution of complex tactics. Then the radio exploded with traffic. Jester 7, Hammer 1-4. Multiple vehicles inbound from the village, count 4 technicals, estimated 20+ personnel. Raven's targeting pod swung north, finding the vehicles immediately, 4 Toyota pickups racing south, their beds carrying armed men, headlights cutting through darkness. Hammer 1-4 Revenant has visual on vehicles. Request clearance to engage. Revenant cleared hot, vehicles are hostile. Friendlies are inside compound perimeter. She was already rolling in, selecting a GBU-54 and designating the lead vehicle. The weapon's computer calculated release parameters. She was high, 20,000 feet, outside of small arms range, perfectly positioned for a precision strike. Revenant rifle. The bomb separated clean, its GPS guidance system tracking toward coordinates, its trajectory perfect. She pulled off target, her eyes watching the targeting pod display as the GBU-54 fell. Impact came 15 seconds later. The lead technical disappeared in a fireball, secondary explosions indicating ammunition had cooked off. The remaining 3 vehicles scattered, drivers realizing they were under air attack. Hammer 1-4 Revenant, lead vehicle destroyed, prosecuting follow-on targets. Revenant cleared hot. She selected a second GBU-54, designated the westernmost vehicle, released. Simultaneously, she noticed something on her threat display, a heat signature appearing on the ridgeline east of the compound, moving, tracking. Jester 7, Revenant. Possible MANPADS, Eastern Ridgeline Grid November Victor 349832. Even as she transmitted, she saw the missile launch, a bright plume climbing toward her position. Her defensive systems erupted with warnings. She'd been spiked again. The missile climbed with patient inevitability, seeking her heat signature, its seeker head locked on to the Super Hornet's engines. Raven responded with practiced speed, chaff, flares, a hard diving turn that pulled 6 GS and compressed her vision to a tunnel. The altitude unwound, 18,000, 15, 12. She watched the missile track on her threat display, calculating intercept geometry, making minute adjustments to her flight path that converted certain death to probable miss. At 9,000 feet, the missile lost lock, distracted by a flare package that burned hotter than her engines. It detonated harmlessly, a firework display that lit the valley for 3 seconds. Raven rolled upright, immediately searching for the launch site. Hammer 1-4 Revenant is defending. Confirm location of MANPADS team. Revenant, Eastern Ridgeline, approximately grid November Victor 349835. We're taking fire from that position. She found them through the targeting pod, 3 heat signatures on the ridgeline, one carrying what was clearly another missile tube. They were reloading, preparing for a second shot. They'd be ready in perhaps 30 seconds. Raven made a decision. She rolled inverted, pulled the Super Hornet's nose toward the ridgeline, and dove. This wasn't a precision weapons attack from safe altitude. This was close air support the way it had been practiced in Vietnam and Korea. Low, fast, dangerous, pressing into the teeth of enemy fire because the people on the ground needed immediate help. Her airspeed climbed. 400 knots, 500, 600. The ridgeline rushed toward her, rocky terrain that would kill her as efficiently as any missile. She selected her 20mm cannon, felt the weapon system arm, placed her targeting pipper on the MANPADS team. At 2,000 feet above terrain, she opened fire. The Vulcan cannon's buzzsaw roar filled the cockpit, felt more than heard. Depleted uranium rounds streamed toward the ridgeline at nearly 3,000 feet per second, each round carrying kinetic energy that could punch through armor. The MANPADS team disappeared in explosions of rock dust and shattered terrain. Raven pulled hard, grunting against 8 gs of force, the aircraft groaning but holding together. The Super Hornet climbed away from the ridgeline, Raven's breath coming hard, her vision clearing as the G-forces released. Behind her, the MANPADS position was silent, neutralized, the threat eliminated. Hammer 1-4, Revenant. MANPADS team destroyed. Any other threats? Negative, Revenant, thanks for the save. Morrison's voice came through, tight with controlled aggression. Revenant, Jester 7. We have the package, but we're taking effective fire from structures in the village. Need immediate suppression, multiple targets. Raven checked her weapon status. 2 GBU-54s remaining, 2 GBU-12s and 3/4 of her cannon ammunition. Her fuel was dropping faster than planned from the low-altitude maneuvering. Jester 7 described targets. Multiple structures, muzzle flashes from windows and roofs. Grid November Victor 348789 through 348802. Danger close, friendlies at 200 meters south. 200 meters, better than some of her previous danger-close missions, but still well within the blast radius of 500-pound bombs. She'd need precision, perfect placement, weapons that would neutralize threats without creating collateral damage that killed civilians or friendlies. Jester 7, Revenant copies. Stand by for multiple passes. She selected her remaining GBU-54s, planning a rolling attack, come in from the south, release on the westernmost structure, pull off, re-attack from a different angle for the eastern structure. The weather was degrading now, clouds building, visibility decreasing. She could see it through her cockpit, the sky going gray, precipitation beginning. The forecast front had arrived early. She rolled in, designating the first structure through her targeting pod despite the lowering visibility. The building was 2-story stone construction, heat signatures visible in the windows indicating occupants. Her weapons computer showed green, release parameters optimal. Revenant rifle. The GBU-54 dropped free, tracking toward the building. She pulled off, immediately maneuvering for her second attack. The first bomb impacted with precision that satisfied something deep in her professional soul. Direct hit, building collapsing inward, threat eliminated. Jester 7, shack on western structure, prosecuting second target. The second attack run was through weather that had degraded from marginal to dangerous. Clouds now obscured the terrain, visibility dropped to less than a mile, and rain was beginning to spatter against her windscreen. Raven flew on instruments and targeting pod imagery, trusting technology to paint reality she could no longer see directly. She found the eastern structure, designated it, released her final GBU-54. The bomb tracked true despite the weather, guided by GPS satellites that didn't care about clouds or rain. Impact, explosion, another shack. Hammer 1-4, Revenant, both structures destroyed, status. Revenant, we've broken contact, moving to exfil LZ. Enemy forces are withdrawing. Morrison's voice carried relief. Chalk 2 is inbound, 5 mics. 5 minutes until the extraction helicopter arrived. 5 minutes when everything could still go wrong. Raven established an orbit over the exfil landing zone, her sensors scanning for threats, her mind calculating fuel remaining versus time required. She had maybe 40 minutes before fuel became critical, 20 minutes before she'd need to head for the tanker. The SEALs reached the landing zone, established security, popped IR strobes that were invisible to naked eyes but bright as searchlights in her targeting pod. The MH-47 approached from the south, low and fast, flaring to landing in a practiced maneuver. Chalk 2 is on the deck, Morrison transmitted. Loading personnel. Raven watched through her targeting pod, counting seconds. The helicopter was vulnerable now, grounded, its rotors making it impossible to miss. If enemy forces counterattacked, if anyone fired an RPG or heavy machine gun, the helicopter would be a stationary target. 30 seconds. 45. Revenant, Hammer 1-4. Vehicle inbound from the northeast, single technical, rapid approach. She found it immediately, a Toyota racing toward the landing zone, perhaps a kilometer out, closing fast. Her remaining weapons were 2 GBU-12 laser-guided bombs and her cannon. The cannon was faster, but the technical was weaving, making a gunshot difficult in the degraded weather. Hammer 1-4, Revenant is engaging with cannon. She rolled in through clouds that scraped her canopy with moisture, emerged into rain that streaked her windscreen, found the technical through her targeting pod, and opened fire. The cannon rounds walked toward the technical in a line of explosions, each impact visible as a bright flash in the infrared sensor. The vehicle jinked left, right, its driver trying desperately to evade. Raven adjusted her aim with minute stick movements, leading the target, compensating for the vehicle's speed and her aircraft's motion. The technical exploded, ammunition cooking off in secondary detonations that lit the night. Hammer 1-4, target destroyed. Chalk 2 is lifting. The helicopter climbed away from the landing zone, banking south toward safety, its precious cargo of SEALs and their high-value prisoner secured. Raven maintained her orbit, watching until the helicopter was clear of the valley, until it had transitioned to high-speed flight and was beyond the range of ground fire. Revenant, Jester 7. Mission complete, all personnel recovered, package secured. Morrison's voice carried exhaustion and triumph. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it, Commander. Raven checked her fuel, lower than she'd like but sufficient for recovery. She turned south, away from the Korangal Valley, away from the violence and chaos, pointing her aircraft toward the tanker that would give her the fuel to reach Bagram. As she climbed through weather, as the adrenaline began to fade and fatigue settled into her bones, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Everyone had made it. The mission was successful. She'd kept her promise. But she'd also used every weapon, pushed her aircraft to its limits, made decisions that balanced on the knife edge between acceptable risk and suicidal aggression. One day her luck would run out. One day the missile would track true, the enemy fire would connect, the aircraft would fail at the critical moment. She knew this with certainty. Every combat pilot knew it. The question wasn't if, but when. Until then, she'd keep flying, keep staying on station, keep bringing people home, because that's who she was. Revenant, the one who returns, the one who refuses to quit, the one who'd made a promise to herself over Helmand Province 5 years ago. A promise she'd keep until it killed her, or until there was no one left who needed saving. The debrief at Bagram lasted 6 hours. Intelligence officers wanted every detail about al-Rashid's compound, about enemy tactics, about the MANPADS team and their positioning. Morrison's team provided ground perspective, Raven provided air perspective, and between them they reconstructed the mission with the precision of a forensic investigation. When it finally ended, when the intelligence officers had extracted every useful piece of information and departed to write their reports, Morrison walked Raven back toward the flight line. The sun was setting, painting the Afghan mountains in shades of orange and purple, beauty that seemed incongruous with the violence that had occurred there just hours before. "Commander," Morrison said quietly, "I need to tell you something. Before this mission, before I knew who you were, I looked at you in that hangar and made assumptions. Saw a small woman in a flight suit and thought, well, I thought things that were wrong and unfair and based on biases I didn't even know I had." Raven listened, her expression neutral, letting him continue. Then I learned you were Revenant 2-1. Then I learned what you'd done in Helmand, what you'd done for my brother. Then I flew missions with you providing support, watched you make decisions that required more courage than I've ever needed. He stopped walking, turned to face her directly. I was wrong about you, but more than that, you made me understand something about courage and competence, and the quiet way some people save lives without needing recognition or medals or validation. His voice grew thick with emotion. You're the kind of person the military needs more of, Commander. The kind who does the job perfectly not because someone's watching, but because lives depend on it. The kind who risks everything not for glory, but because it's right. Raven was quiet for a long moment, looking at the mountains, at the sky that was her home, at the aircraft that had brought her through another mission when statistics said she should have died. Morrison, can I tell you something? I'm scared every single mission. Scared I'll make a mistake, scared I'll let someone down, scared that one day my skill won't be enough and someone will die because I failed them. She looked at him then, letting him see the vulnerability she normally kept hidden. But I keep flying because fear is just information. 6 months after Operation Granite Shield, Raven stood in a ceremony room at Naval Air Station Oceana, wearing her dress uniform with the weight of medals she'd never asked for but had received anyway. The Distinguished Flying Cross hung among them now, awarded despite her protests, accompanied by a citation that detailed her actions supporting Special Operations Forces. Morrison stood nearby, himself recently promoted, his own chest bearing decorations earned through actions she'd supported from 20,000 feet. Captain Martinez was speaking, addressing an audience of naval aviators, maintenance personnel, and senior officers. Commander Cowery represents the finest traditions of naval aviation. Her record speaks for itself: 143 combat missions, 38 close air support missions under fire, 16 aircraft battle damage incidents, and 0 friendly casualties in any operation she supported. Martinez paused, looking directly at Raven. But statistics don't capture who she is. They don't capture the junior SEAL who's alive because she stayed on station with a damaged aircraft. They don't capture the maintenance chief who knows his aircraft will be treated with respect and brought home safely. They don't capture the dozens of ground forces personnel who trust her call sign more than they trust their own planning. He gestured to Morrison. Lieutenant Commander Morrison recently told me something. He said that in special operations, there are pilots you request because they're competent, pilots you request because they're excellent, and then there's Revenant 2-1, the pilot you request when you need someone who will treat your life like it matters more than their own. The room was silent. Raven stood at attention, her face composed, but her hands were trembling slightly. Today, we're not just recognizing Commander Cowery's individual achievements. We're recognizing what she represents, the standard all of us should aspire to. The dedication to mission accomplishment balanced with care for human life. The technical excellence married to moral courage. The quiet professionalism that makes others better through example. Martinez stepped forward, extending his hand. Commander Cowery, on behalf of naval aviation and everyone whose life you've saved or affected, thank you for your service, your courage, and your unwavering commitment to bringing everyone home. Years would pass, and Raven's story would become legend in the ready rooms and tactical operations centers where pilots and operators prepared for missions. Young aviators would ask about Revenant 2-1, and older pilots would tell stories, some accurate, some embellished, all carrying the essential truth of who she was. They'd talk about the mission where she'd stayed on station for 4 hours past fuel minimums, kept aloft by 3 emergency tanker rendezvous that required coordination across 2 time zones. They'd talk about the time she'd landed a Super Hornet with catastrophic hydraulic failure, bringing the aircraft back through pure skill when every regulation said it should be abandoned. They'd talk about the SEAL team that credited her with saving their lives, the Marine Rifle Company that wouldn't be alive without her precision strikes, the Air Force pararescue jumpers who'd watched her provide cover fire while they extracted wounded personnel under fire. But the most important story, the one that captured her essence, was quieter. It was about a young pilot, fresh from flight school, who'd asked her once why she pushed so hard, why she took risks that other pilots avoided, why she seemed driven by something beyond duty or career advancement. Raven had been quiet for a long time, looking at the sky, before answering. Because every mission I fly, every time I strap into that aircraft, I'm carrying the weight of everyone who depends on me. The ground forces who trust my call sign, the maintenance crews who prepare my aircraft perfectly, the commanders who authorize my missions. I can't let them down. I won't let them down. She'd paused, then added something the young pilot never forgot. And because I remember the fear in a JTAC's voice when he thought he was dying. I remember what it felt like to be the only person who could help him. I remember making the choice to stay when I could have left safely. That choice changed me. Made me understand that some things matter more than regulations, more than career, more than my own life. Bringing people home safely, that matters. That's worth everything. The young pilot had gone on to have her own distinguished career, and years later, when she commanded her own squadron, she'd tell that story to her pilots. She'd explain that Revenant 21 hadn't just been an exceptional aviator. She'd been proof that one person, fully committed to doing right, could change dozens of lives. Could inspire hundreds more, could create ripples that spread through decades and across continents. Raven eventually retired, her body bearing the accumulated stress of high-G maneuvering, her mind carrying memories of missions flown and lives saved. She'd never spoken publicly about her career, never wrote a memoir, never sought attention beyond the professional respect of those who'd served alongside her. But her legacy lived on in the pilots who tried to emulate her standards, in the ground forces who trusted naval aviation because she'd proven it could be trusted, in the families who had their loved ones home because she'd refused to quit. They called her Revenant, the one who returns. But her real gift wasn't coming back from missions that should have killed her. It was bringing everyone else back too, mission after mission, year after year, until the weight of it had nearly broken her. She'd carried that weight anyway, because some things matter more than safety, more than regulations, more than fear. Bringing people home matters. That was her truth, her calling, her legacy. The sky above Naval Air Station Oceana was empty now, no Super Hornets climbing through the morning light. But if you listened closely, some said, you could still hear the echo of engines, the ghost of a pilot who'd refused to quit, the memory of someone who'd understood that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something matters more than fear. Revenant, the one who returns, the one who never left anyone behind, the legend who'd started with a joke about rank and ended with a career that redefined what it meant to serve. That was Commander Raven Cowery. That was the story they'd tell for generations, and every word of it was true.